Spent a lot of time hiding wine glasses in closets. I was increasingly afraid of driving. I was afraid of the telephone. And there was another night when I got down on my knees and I put my wine glass down. And I said to a God that I hadn't approached, thought of, communicated, or had any belief in over 20 years. And I said, I can't seem to live and I can't seem to die. And I need help.
This is The Bottom Line. I'm Gary Thiemann in Hollywood. A drunkalogue is the actual story of a once practicing alcoholic. Some would go to great lengths to hide their addiction, and every alcoholic has their bottom. For those who don't make it, it's insanity and then death. Not every alcoholic's bottom obviously ends up on Skid Row, and that's a common misconception about the disease of alcoholism. For Jane, her bottom was fear, a gut-wrenching fear, a fear that she says was all between the ears. Jane explains.
My name is Jane, and I'm a grateful alcoholic. I was born and raised in a small lumber and cattle town up in Central Oregon, and there was a lot of drinking in my home. And my father, when he drank, he became quiet and more dignified, and he played the piano. My mother, when she drank, became Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the unpredictable personality change. And I would love to tell you that when I took up drinking that I became quiet and dignified and played the piano. That simply isn't true. I was one of those who my personality became unpredictable. My reactions became unpredictable when I was drinking. I really did not I didn't drink much actually until I got into college. The end of high school, we would have a glass of wine at Christmas or Thanksgiving. But when I got into college, I discovered that I liked the way alcohol made me feel. And I began to feel like I was a part of a group for the first time. It wasn't that I was the most unpopular person in school. It was like there was the top rung of the pep club and the rally squad people, and then there was a second tier. And I was kind of in that second tier, and I always wanted to be part of the in crowd, and I never felt that I made it. And my father was an attorney, and we had what other people perceived as a lot of advantages, and we had a nice home, and we did a lot of traveling. And yet the thing that they didn't understand is when we quit playing or whatever at the end of the school day, and at 5 o'clock at night at my house when the martinis came out, there was a lot of emotional chaos and a lot of inconsistent parenting and not much nurturing. And yet everybody seemed to be envious of me. So I really decided early on that I must be wrong. There was something wrong with me if everybody thought I was so fortunate. And it was when I got to college and that I knew that alcohol made me feel like I was a part of. And there used to be a place where we would drink and we would have Fridays at 4 at the end of classes. And once I discovered how alcohol made me feel, then I had Fridays at 4 and Fridays at 2 and Wednesdays at 4. Whenever, as frequently as I could, I got out to do some beer drinking. Once I started to drink, I drank on a daily basis for the next 15 to 17 years. I was never a bar drinker. At the end of my drinking, I simply sat in the back corner of a couch in a deteriorating bathrobe with more and more cigarette burns in it. And I had, again, from what other people thought, I had a career which a lot of people thought was going great, but I had felt like I was a fraud my entire life. And I always just said, well, I was just lucky, or the right time and the right place, because I knew that eventually someone, clients, the people with whom I was dealing, I knew ultimately they were going to find out that I was hollow and shallow on the inside. One of the main characteristics I remember from those last years of drinking, the last 2 years particularly. In 1977, I came out of my second divorce, and I drank for 2 years behind that. And, poor Jane, her career's bottoming out. Poor Jane, she's given up custody of her son. Poor Jane, she has 2 failed marriages. And then in 1977, I decided I wanted to quit drinking. But I found out what a lot of us found out is that I couldn't. Oh, and yet I would try. I had a friend who we thought that Alcoholics Anonymous would teach us how to control our drinking, and we thought Alcoholics Anonymous was only a buddy system, and that so we'd have this deal of we would have 2 scotches before dinner and 2 glasses of wine after dinner, and when we wanted that next glass of wine, we would call and talk to each other. That's what we thought Alcoholics Anonymous was. And time after time, I would make that pact with myself. I would make a commitment to myself that I'll just have 2 drinks before dinner and 2 glasses of wine after dinner. And I couldn't understand why suddenly, after about 2 days of that, if that long, a hangnail I'd get a hangnail and I'd be off and drinking again, and I didn't understand why. And in those last 2 years of drinking, my life was increasingly characterized by fear. I was afraid of the telephone. I would ask you to call me before 8 o'clock at night, or I would call you before 8 o'clock, and that was the way that I could minimize you calling at 10 and finding out that my tongue wasn't working very crisply. Spent a lot of time hiding wine glasses in closets. I was increasingly afraid of driving. I was one of those, I never got a drunk driving arrest. I certainly deserved them. I didn't lose my family. I still had a home. But my Skid Row was between my ears and internally. And those last 2 years were just increasingly filled with fear and not knowing why I couldn't get my drinking under control. It's interesting. I was trained as a medical writer, and I had written a news story in 1970, and the lead on that news story was "Alcohol is the most dangerous drug in America." And yet it took me another 11 years before I really understood the significance of that statement. I was unemployed and unemployable at that time, and there was a night when I looked at my answer machine, and I thought, Jane, you don't need to turn that answer machine off. You can just leave it on all the time, and you don't have to worry about friends and families calling and finding out and discovering how much you're drinking. And when I looked at that answer machine, there was a voice deep down inside that said, Jane, you're in deep trouble and you need help. And there was another night when I got down on my knees and I put my wine glass down, and I said to a God that I hadn't approached, thought of, communicated, or had any belief in over 20 years. And I said, I can't seem to live and I can't seem to die, and I need help.
It is said that it's always darkest before the dawn, and in Jane's case, there's a light ahead in the tunnel. As her recovery process begins next on The Bottom Line.
This is an egg. What's it have to do with drunk driving? I'll tell you while I make breakfast. The drunk driver who kills says, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. If only I could go back. But there's no going back and undoing a drunk driving accident. You can't undo the hurt, the suffering, the broken families, any more than you can unscramble an egg. So please, don't drink and drive.
Finding recovery is like finding the inner child that was somehow lost in the drunken shuffle. A phone call to Central Office of Alcoholics Anonymous, which incidentally is listed in the white pages of the telephone directory, introduced the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, a program that gets you into service and out of yourself. And that starts the program of progress, Jane explains.
When I asked for help, I can't remember the time frame because I was so fuzzy, because I was drinking around the clock. I called the central office of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was gulping and crying and said I needed help, and they told me about where I could go to a meeting that night. And I really had thought that I would walk into a gloomy, smoke-filled hall filled with old men in dirty overcoats, each clutching onto a brown paper bag. And that's so far from the truth, because what I found was a group of people with bright eyes. They were nicely dressed. There was lots and lots of laughter. And it had been a long time since I had heard much of that. And there were more smiles. I saw more teeth than I wanted to see. And the only thing that I remember from my first meeting that night was that somebody said, "You don't ever have to be alone again." And that has proven to be true. In my history of Alcoholics Anonymous, I am either blessed or cursed with a great deal of energy, and I have thrown it into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was told from the beginning that I should get into service to other people. And what was interesting to me was that by focusing outward for the first time and being willing to help others and think about others, I found myself. I was told to wash cups, pick up ashtrays, give my telephone number to people who had less time than I did. I was told that it was important in the beginning to focus on the similarities instead of the differences between us, and that's very true. It doesn't make any difference what we drank, how long we drank, where we drank. None of that makes any difference. What the similarities of our feelings are all the same. We've all had the same fears, and we've all suffered from the same loneliness. And I think it was very important to listen to those feelings. And I heard people talk who both from what they said from the inside and from what they look like on the outside. It was hard to imagine how far they had come, and yet I believed them. That I'd lived my entire life focused on on me, and I lived a life based on ego, a lot of it negative. And now I have a life that is focused on God, and I had a life that was run on fear, and today it's based on faith. And I had for years been a fault finder because I felt so awful about myself. I would tear you down so that I would feel better about me. And today, although sometimes it takes effort, I can be a love finder instead of a fault finder. And again, I had spent my life primarily focusing on negative thoughts, and today I choose to have positive thoughts and positive people in my life. And I had lived all of my life waiting for life to give me its due, sitting around dreaming and waiting for it. And what I get up in the morning today is get up willing to look at what I can contribute to life, what I can contribute to others. And that's a drastic change. My life has also changed drastically. I have gone from being unemployed and unemployable to being a successful businesswoman today. I went back to work when I was 6 months sober and in a middle management position. When I was 4 years sober, became vice president of another firm, and 3 years ago I went out and formed my own company, and it has been very successful. There's no employer in the world who would put up with the amount of time that I devote to working with other alcoholics, and maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. You know, the book of Alcoholics Anonymous says that there are 3 things that we have to do, and one of them is to work on our relationship with a loving God. The second thing that it says that I have to do is, it says I have to be willing to clean house, and that for me is working the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous on a daily basis. And the third thing it says I have to do is be willing to give away all, what the gifts that I have been given, and that means to be willing to work with other alcoholics.
With the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous in action, a light is cast at the end of the tunnel, a spiritual awakening is born, the greatest high of all. Next on The Bottom Line.
This is an egg. What's it have to do with drunk driving? I'll tell you while I make breakfast. The drunk driver who kills says, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. If only I could go back." But there's no going back and undoing a drunk driving accident. You can't undo the hurt, the suffering, the broken families, any more than you can unscramble an egg. So please, don't drink and drive.
This is The Bottom Line. Through prayer and meditation, Jane is centered spiritually, a daily work that is put into practice each and every day. First, finding a loving God that she understands, that she calls her higher power, and everything else seems to fall right into place.
I had no fear of God. God was not a him that sat up with a black book making check marks. But I also had no faith in God. In the 60s, when in my 20s, it wasn't terribly popular. God wasn't a real hot topic of conversation, and I'd kind of put him up on a shelf then. And I really did not take him down from that shelf until the night that I got down on my knees and said, "I can't seem to live, and I can't seem to die, and I need help." And I am one who believes that, the channel to an inner self, to a God within, was open that night, and it remains open, and it remains open because I work at it. I do some types of prayer and meditation every day. I start the morning and I end each day with some kind of spiritual reading. It's like a garden that grows beautifully. You have to put effort into it. You have to plant seeds, and you have to give it fertilizer, and you have to water the seeds, and you have to go in and pull weeds. That is really the spiritual basis of my life. Alcoholism is the only disease in the world that tells you don't have it. And on one hand, on one of my shoulders, I visualize that there's a little monster up there, and I call her Denise Denial. And she has nothing to do all day long but to sit there and tell me that it's okay if I have a glass of wine tonight, or champagne is okay on my birthday. That's the bad news. The good news is that on my other shoulder sits a loving God who has given me so much more in my life today than I could have ever dreamed about. What the effort that I have put into Alcoholics Anonymous, my commitment to working with other alcoholics, and my commitment to continually develop a relationship and a deeper belief in a loving God, to the degree the effort that I have put in to those priorities in my life, I have been rewarded with much more than I ever could have imagined.
You've been listening to The Bottom Line, featuring Jane's story. Jane, thank you so much for sharing your story. Just another example of what it means by giving it back, and for that we're grateful. This show is produced in Hollywood. I'm Gary Thiemann. Until next time, God bless you, and share the message, won't you? This has been a GRT production.
But there is no easy And when